Welcome back to this course, Action Game Coding Essentials. In this video lesson, we're going to learn how to code a timer. Now, timers are useful for all kinds of games, including action games, where you may want to time limit the amount of time a player has to achieve an objective, or you may want to trigger events at certain times. So we're going to go straight ahead and create some code. And at the Pixel Gang, we always code our timer on the stage, so we always know where it is. We could, of course, put the timer code on any sprite, but sprites differ between games, and we always have the stage. So I've selected the stage here. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to go to Variables, and I'm going to click Make a Variable, and we're simply going to call this variable timer. You could call it clock, you could call it countdown, it's up to you. Let's click OK, and I want to show you something that is useful. If you did call it clock or countdown or timer and later decided to change it, you can right click on the name of the variable and rename it. That's really handy, and when you do that, any code you have created with that name will automatically update. Now at the moment you'll see that the timer is visible because it has a tick by it here, and sure enough here it is on our stage, and I'm going to relocate it over here to the middle of the stage. Now the tick next to it indicates that it is visible, but we can turn this off because we're going to use some code to show and hide the timer. Let's move past the existing code on the stage here to the bottom and go to Events, and we're going to put a when I receive how to play. You will remember that the how to play event handler is sent to show the instruction screen at the beginning of the game. And we are going to go back to variables here, and we're going to put on this event handler hide variable, and of course we need to choose timer. Let's move up a little way here so we can see this clearly. So timer. Now the next one we need is when I receive begin game, back to variables, and we want show timer. We can just test this. We'll press B, there's our instruction screen, we'll click to begin the game, and our timer appears, as do the other variables we've created. Okay, let's end that. Now to create a timer is very simple. We're going to have this timer running throughout the game, so we need to go to Control, we need to add a forever, and then inside the forever we simply add the duration we want to wait before the timer changes. And then we go back to variables and we get our change timer by 1. So in this case we are going to make the timer change every second. Let's just test this, and you can see here, let's go full screen, you can see here the timer is counting up by the second. Okay, let's end our game, and before we pause to allow you to code this, let's do something slightly different. Let's take a set timer here, and we're going to do a countdown. So we've got set timer to 0. Let's give this game 60 seconds. Set timer to 60. Let's just once again just test this. So now our timer is counting beyond 60. We don't want that, of course, we want it to count down. So let's end our game, and let's change our timer here to -1 instead of 1. Now our timer is going to count down. Let's test that. Here we are. Our timer is slowly counting down. Okay, now this is fine. Now there is one problem with this code, and I'm going to demonstrate this by just temporarily changing the timer to 5 seconds, and then we will restart it, and you will see what happens. The timer continues into negative numbers. Now we probably don't want that, and there's several ways to stop it, and perhaps the best way is to put an if around this code here. So let's go and do that. And we're going to put an if all the way around here, inside the forever, of course. And what we want it to say, and we're going to go to our operators, is it is going to say, we're going to put a greater than operator in here. We're going to change this to 0 in here. And then we're going to go back to our variables. We're going to take timer from here. Whoops. This is a code block 2. And we're going to put this, let's just zoom back out again. And we're going to put this into here. So this says if timer is greater than 0, wait 1 second, change timer by -1. Let's test this. Here we go. The timer is still greater than 0. Now, of course, it's reached 0. Oh, and we've got a failure there as well. The cat just lost its lives at exactly the same time. Shall I just test this again? That was interesting. So, I think the cat's going to lose its lives before the timer gets to 0, isn't it? Yes, it is. That's hilarious. Let me play the game so the cat can avoid being hit, and then you'll see the timer working correctly. So, I'll just click. I'll move the cat around. Of course, the bear is firing very accurately, and you'll see the timer counting down, and now it reaches 0 and it doesn't go any further. But the problem is the game hasn't stopped. Therefore, we need to add another bit of code here to solve this problem, and we're going to do that from the control code blocks. We're going to select another if in here. We're going to go back to our operators, and this time we're going to select an equals operator, like so, and we're going to change it to equals 0. We're going to put our timer variable into that, so if timer equals 0, and then finally, if we go down to control at the bottom, we're going to put a stop all in here, like so. Let's test this briefly. And once again, I'm going to make the cat avoid as many bananas as possible, and we'll see that the timer gets to 0 and the game has indeed ended. So that's a really simple timer for you. I'm going to set the timer up here back to 60. Of course, that equals 1 minute. You can set it to whatever you like. If you need it to be 2 minutes or 3 or 4 or just 30 seconds, you might find that whilst you're testing the game, you want to set this to a low number so you don't have to wait too long to see the timer finish. But I'll just pause here and allow you to add this code, and then we'll continue with some options and some additions afterwards. Okay, we have a problem with this timer in that when the time runs out, the game simply stops without any indication or message for the player. If they're keeping their eye on the timer display, they will see it's reached 0, but it would be much better if we actually had something visual on the stage to tell the player they've run out of time. So we're on the stage at the moment. Let's move over to backdrops. We have 4 backdrops: how to play, the play backdrop, success and failure. I am going to right click on the failure one and duplicate it. We now have a 5th backdrop. I'm going to call this one, what should we call it? Time ran out. You might be able to think of a better name for your backdrop. And then I'm going to take my selection tool here and I'm going to click on my text, and I want to type in a bit more. Now there's going to be a few words more than a single word like this, so what I think I will do is I will just reduce the size of this a bit, and I'm just going to move it over here. I'm then going to double click in here and I'm going to type in here, the time ran out. I'm going to do a return on my keyboard and I'm going to type, press the B key to play again. Let's change that. Let's say I just double click there to try again, and I'm going to put a few spaces in here That's good. I'm going to go back to my selection tool here. I think I can just make this a little bit bigger. And drag it down to the middle here. Yes, I think something like that is fine. So now we have a fifth backdrop. We need to create the code to switch to it. So let's go back to our code tab, back to the algorithm that we've produced for the timer. And I can see here it says if timer equals 0, stop all. Well, let's make this something a little bit better. Let's take our stop all out. Let's go back to events. Let's get a new broadcast, and we're going to broadcast new message, time ran out. There we go, time ran out. Now you'll remember that we have a bunch of receives up here. When I receive success, switch to backdrop success. When I receive failure, switch to backdrop failure and stop all. Let's go and create one. In fact, let's just see if we can. Let's click here and duplicate this, move it sort of between these two, then do a clean up blocks. There we go, that's good. And we're going to put on here, when I receive time ran out, switch to backdrop, time ran out, and stop all. So let's just test this. But before we do so, we need to change one thing, otherwise it's going to take us 60 seconds to test it. We're going to go back and reset our timer to only 5 seconds. Now we can test it quickly. I'm going to avoid the bananas. We can see the timer counting down here. There we go. It reached 0 and we got the message. I can press B on my keyboard to have another go at the game. Let's try and keep away from these bananas. And there we go. That's working perfectly. So let's go back here. First of all, create yourself a fifth backdrop. And now go back to the code tab and edit your code. So you have, oh, let's find the other time ran out. Here we are. So on this code, you need to add this when I receive algorithm, and down here you're adding in if timer equals 0, broadcast time ran out. I want to add one more thing in this lesson, and that is an extra sprite which appears when the timer reaches a certain time and then disappears again later. And I'm simply going to come down here, choose a new sprite from the sprite library. I think this time I'll choose the cake, and the cake sprite has loaded in here, and I'm very simply going to put some code on here. We'll use as before, when I receive how to play, we will hide. I think we'll also on here, because there's no reason why not to, set our size to something more reasonable. I'm going to take this down to about 30%. If I just take the hide off here and click the code, you'll see the cake resize. Yes, that's fine. Now we're going to put on our when I receive begin game event handler. We're going to put a forever in here, and then inside the forever, from our control code blocks, we're going to put an if else, like so. And let's go back to our looks, and we're going to say if something is true, which we're going to code in a moment, show, else hide. Now what we want the cake to do is to appear between two times, and we are simply going to put an operator into this if here. Let's go to operators, and we need an AND operator. We're going to pop it in there like that, and then we need a greater than and a less than operator. And in both of these, if we go back to timer, we're going to put timer. And we're going to put if timer is greater than 5 but less than 15, and we're going to put this into here and this one into here. Let's just zoom in so we can have a good look at this. If timer is greater than 5 and less than 15, then it will show else hide. Now we're going to test this, but first we need to ensure the timer is set correctly. So I'm going to go back to the stage and I can see that the timer is still on 5. So I'm just going to set this to 30. This is something you might have to do quite a bit when you're testing your game. Let's go back to the cake. Let's go to full screen mode again. And let's just see what happens. We can see the timer counting down here. Now if I remember rightly, and when it reaches 15, the cake should appear. There we are, the cake has appeared. The timer is between 5 and 15. It's carrying on down. It should disappear when it gets to 5, and there it is, it's disappeared at 5. So we have now got a sprite here that appears and disappears according to time. So what I'd like to do now is pause, go and load in a sprite of your choice from the sprite library, set its size, and then add this code, not forgetting to go and ensure that your timer has at least 5 or 6 seconds more than this figure here. In my case, I set it to 30. Okay, now what this cake is going to do when it appears is completely up to you, but we could do something like this. Let's put when I receive begin game, another one on here. Let's put in here a forever. Let's put a move 10 steps and an if on edge bounce, and let's put a pointing direction, just a kind of any kind of random direction here, and let's see what this code does. So pointing direction 60, move 10 steps, if on edge bounce. Let's begin our game again. I need to avoid the bananas so the game has a chance to count down. And I haven't lost any HP yet. Let's see if we can grab some. Whoops. A bit trickier than I thought. Let's got a bit more here. Now coming up to 15. And here comes our cake careering around the stage. And when it gets down to 5, our cake should disappear. Well, that's great fun. Let's end our game. Come back to our cake code here. So we've got this cake moving around the stage at high speed. Wouldn't it be great if the cake took HP if it hit the cat? Should we try that? Let's add in here. Now this may not work because the cake is moving so fast, but let's add in here if, and then from touching, if touching cat, down to variables, change cat HP by -1. We'll come back and allow you to code this as soon as we've established whether it's working or not. So here we go, let's test it. Let's keep out of the way of the bananas. So we survive until we get to 15. We've got some health points here, that's good. Let's go and see if we can pick some of those up. That'll help us survive a bit longer. And the cake is going to appear. And let's see if we can get the cake to hit the cat. Well, that definitely worked. It took the cat HP down. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but the cat lost more than 1 HP when it touched the cake. and we only want it to lose a single HP each time it touches the cake. Therefore, we need to add in another code block here, and we'll simply go to control, and the top one is wait 1 second, and we'll add it underneath here. Now, when the cat touches the cake, we'll only lose 1 HP every 1 second. Now I'm going to pause to allow you to code this. So let's zoom in here. I think we've learnt enough for this lesson, so I'm simply going to go and save the game once more. File save to your computer. I will version it to version 5, I think, and save. Please do go and experiment with some of the code we've learnt in this lesson, and we'll come back to complete this course, Action Game Coding Essentials, with the final lesson.